Good morning. I enjoy serving God. I enjoy serving God with God's people and having you all here. And we got visitors and Ryan and his whole family. And I like to work and I love to party. One of the things I like to do is look at life in a positive way. Last week we started a series in the book of Ecclesiastes just showing if you want to really have good attitude, Solomon said, look, I've tried it all. These kind of things work really well. That's not going to get you where you want to go. And so this morning, we're going to be in chapter 3. And it's going to be challenges dealing with a happy life. Well, I want to have it. Well, is it always summer and always flowers coming up and nothing challenging ever happens to believers? No, that's going to be part of life. But he shows here's how to work with those things. The idea of challenges is some obstacle. You think different kind of races, and one of them is hurdles. I was talking to a lady on Friday, and here's this little bitty gal, and I went in to have a sports meds doc. I said, look, I want to get back into my exercise, but here's kind of a meniscus little knee issue. What can we do to make this happen? So we got to talking about athletics. She said, oh yeah, I was in Taekwondo. She said, I just got done, here's this little bitty person, just got done doing the Ironman contest. I said, you did the Ironman contest? I said, what's involved? She says, well, you go out and for us, you swim in the ocean for 2.5 miles, then you get on a bike and you ride it for 117 miles, and then you run a marathon. Oh yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. And so you get impressed by obstacles that people surmount and do it absolutely beautifully. Because there's just challenges in all kinds of things. I've been reading a book about the opening of the West and how, 1849 gold found in California and Colorado, Arizona, and such as this. And some of the individuals that they spent their life, okay, we're going to go to Europe, find all the gold mining process and how to separate the ore and do this. And they come back and they get a mine and they do it. And then 2 brothers, and one of them dies before they even get it going. The other one, they run into challenges and running out of supplies. So he decides to cross the Sierra Nevadas in the middle of winter. And he doesn't make it. I thought, wow, all that work, and it didn't get them where they wanted to go. Union Pacific Railroad issues, guys that were silver miners, one of the most wealthy men in the world. And then what happened is the U.S. had a law where to help certain landowners that the government would buy tons of silver and was required to buy it. And they went along to this point, and then legislators said, yeah, we're done with that. Guess what happened to the silver miners? Well, it just become lint. And so here's this guy so rich, one of the world's richest, and then just totally impoverished. What gets us over the obstacles to where we would really like to go? Because think about this, you can complete it. If it was easy, then everybody would do it. That's right. Well, there's an obstacle we get. And Solomon said, now here's going to be the answers. You want to have that happy, positive, productive life. He said, here's some of the insights along that line. Now in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, here's that section that everybody has heard, that there's a time for every purpose under heaven. There's actually 14 parallels. I thought, Paul, it's not going to help. Okay, we got 14 points in his sermon, and it's going to last 11 hours. People say, yeah, good. Tell me when it's over. And so we're going to just handle a handful of them and go on. And so I just looked at, here's the calendar. Here's our life. And let me ask you, you don't have to raise your hand. You just internally say, is God's plan for you okay with you? We go, yeah, I would like to know what it is, but yeah, I think it is. Well, let's talk about this. What about the end of life? Well, that has a sobering issue to it. Then we begin to wrestle that kind of thing. In Psalm 31 and verse 15, here's where David said, my times are in thy hand. And that's really true for all of us, isn't it? We've got plans and we're going to do this and that's how it all work out. God says, let me tell you, here's the next step in your life. And a beautiful one in Psalm 139 and down in verse 16, all the days that were ordained for me were written in your book. That's just a way of representing God's eternal mind. For me, probably most of us, we have a little notebook. All right, here's 139 things we need to do, and we check them off. God just knows it all. And he said, the days that were ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. God doesn't have to say, oh, no, man, what's Paul Mitchell up to now? Oh, God said, I know you're rising up. I know you're lying down. I know the words that'll be on your tongue before you speak them. David said, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's beyond our comprehension. But I was going to do this, but I ended up doing that. God said, I know that. I go, wow. And he said, one of the things he knows is how long I'm going to live. I said, Paul, do you know? Nope. My family generally tends to live between 83 and 85. My dad died of an accident when he was 49. I've done memorials for 5-year-old children and people up in their 80s. Done them for teenagers. Done them people that were 21. We don't know those things. So Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 1, he says, there's an appointed time for everything. In the whole realm of God's cosmos, God said, I know when this is going to happen. And he starts off in verse 2, and he said, there's a time to give birth and a time to die. We mentioned in our announcement that Richard Allison, after long-term illness and decline, passed away just yesterday evening, about 6 p.m., surrounded by family. What a blessing having family with you. I think about, and I don't, but I feels like I mentioned about every couple of weeks, this passage that is momentous, Acts 13:36, that David, after he had served the purpose of God in his own generation, fell asleep. If we want to think, well, how do we be happy? Well, do you have a purpose? Do you have a goal? Do you know what God wants you to do? And so if you think of, God, I am able to complete whatever it is you want me to do. And at the end of that time, then that's the end of my life. He said that's what David did. After he served the purpose of God in his own generation, fell asleep. I love the idea of purpose, focus. What are we about? In Revelation 14, down in verse 13, it said, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord. They rest from their labors, and their works follow after them. That is, the last breath is not the end. And beside that, whatever good things you have been doing follow after you. That in your children, your grandchildren, the people you meet, that you have impact with, they said, I am so thankful that you gave me some insight. And from my own life, that somebody said, and I tell people not exactly using these words, but teenager, my life was in flames. And they said, Paul, there are better decisions. Well, I didn't know. I didn't have any role models. But one person set the example for me, and that changed everything. Ignatius, a disciple of Polycarp, a disciple of John, said, when he was arrested and was going to be martyred, he said, I am the wheat of God, and I am going to be ground by the teeth of lions, in order that I might be found to be the pure bread of Christ. I go, oh man, is that what you'd be saying on the way to meet lions? Oh no, man, I'm going to say, has anybody got a hacksaw? I need to get through these chains. And then he goes on. He said, when disciples wanted to rescue him, he said, please don't. I have no desire for anything visible or invisible, so that I may attain to Jesus Christ. Let fire or the cross or the assembly of wild beasts, let breaking of bones and let the shattering in pieces of my entire body come upon me, so that I may attain to Jesus Christ. Paul, that's exactly how you feel. Oh man, that is so overwhelming. He said, I don't care what, set me on fire, crucify me, lions jump on me. He said, I don't care. He said, it is better for me to die for the sake of Christ than to rule the ends of the earth. Man, I mean, that moves us. That sets a goal for us. Lord, how impressive your disciples are. So is God's plan okay with you? We need to have that attitude of, God, I thought I was going this way, but any way you want to do is going to be okay, because that changes our whole mental profile. Well, challenges to a happy life. Is it okay to plant? So, oh yeah, it's good to plant stuff. I remember even as a little kid, had in urban setting, you had tract farms, and here's this little, I'm planting radishes and leaf lettuce and green onions and tomato, and all those things are neat. And so that's good. Well, how about uprooting? Uprooting is good, generally, depending on what you're thinking about uprooting. In Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 2, he says, there's a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. Well, we know that in gardening and farming and all these other things. Fair enough, but think about the application to a variety of issues. What about uprooting an old mindset? That uprooting these ideas that I was kind of locked into and maybe not too happy with, but I wasn't motivated to change. And grow personally. And think, rather than I can and it won't work and I'm too old or I don't know enough or have enough money, I can and I will and I choose. COVID and all this and that, I was really active up to that time, and then martial arts, everything got put aside and barely exercised at all for 2 years. So then I thought, okay, I'm ready to start in. Oh, well, you got this gimpy meniscus, the little cartilage in your left knee. And well, maybe you're too old and that's hard. And, maybe you should just lay in a hammock for the next 20 years. And I thought, Paul, that's crazy. That's not going to help you at all. Now, what are you going to do? If I was going to do something, yeah, but what if it gets worse? Well, what if it doesn't get worse? What if I just put it off? All these kind of nothing, negative thoughts. I said, Paul, if you're going to do something, what would you do? I said, well, the most intelligent thing, what if I went to my sport med doctor and said, take a look at the knee? So I made the appointment, got in there, he said, yeah, you got a little arthritis there, and you do have a meniscus issue. Okay, here's the exercise I want you to do, and here's some anti-inflammatory stuff, and see me in a month and start back. I go, wow. And so as we begin thinking we're got these old whatever ideas that's not helping us or you, wherever they are, and say, maybe it's time to uproot that kind of thing and begin to grow again. It's good for children to be at home. And it's good for children to grow up and leave home. I mean, birds do from the nest, bear cubs do from the den, because that's a part of growth. Man, it's just so much fun having family around. When family leaves, I just hate that. But it's good for them. And so think about, for children, that's good for them to grow, mature, and develop. It's good to uproot what no longer works and begin thinking about, well, what would be a profitable thing if I'm going to make changes in that part of my life? One of the things is setting boundaries. Some people are real good at it, others aren't. Some people want to help so much, they don't have boundaries, and anytime anybody wants you to do anything, they feel compelled to say yes, even though it torpedoes their own goals, development, or family issues. And so there's a time for every purpose under heaven, and there's a time to say no. And so, hey, why don't you do this? And you realize if I do that, it's really going to sink these other things. And you tell them, I'm be so happy to do that. I can't do that now, or I can't do that at all. You set boundaries and uproot those attitudes that really don't work and begin using the ones that do. And think about losing a mate is a massive uprooting. Death and divorce are the two biggest emotional, titanic things that happen to a person. And Juanita Alexander, she and John that were members here for years and years, John was this big, larger-than-life personality, and I would tell people I'd love for him to lead in prayer because his voice was this massive booming. I felt like, boy, the furniture begins to vibrate because of how powerful he was. I've never heard anybody pray like that. And for him, after a long-term illness, he passed away. And checking with Juanita, in fact, I did this past week, and how are you doing? And she said, you know, I helped John all these years. And she does that. She's kind of like the mother hen. She watches over her whole neighborhood, watches over the congregation, over her family. And she said, well, I don't have John to help anymore, so I'm going to look for the next person that I can help. That is, she didn't get caught in the past. It's good to plant. And then we face a time of uprooting. And can we do that? In Luke chapter 2 and verse 36 and 7, Anna, a prophetess, lived with a husband for 7 years. After her marriage, then as a widow to the age of 84, and she never left the temple, serving night and day with fastings and prayer. She was there when Joseph and Mary came to present Jesus. We're not told how old she was when she was married. Was she 17, 19, 24? We don't know. So I just took it if she was 20 years old when she's married, and then married for 7 years, and now we find out she's 84. She's 57 years as a widow with this computation, but active, serving, loving, caring. And so when life throws you a curveball, learn to hit curveballs. And you just keep on serving, you keep on growing, you encourage people. And she did there in her lifetime. And may that be true of all of us, that it's good to plant, but it's okay to be uprooted what was planted before. If we want to face the challenges of a happy life. Now here's an oddity. He said, in Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 3, there's a time to kill and a time to heal. Well, we don't think about that, but there has some merit in that. Think about this. In Genesis chapter 9 and in verse 6, there is where God says, whosoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. That biblically, it was scriptural to execute criminals. And some states have that, some don't. Then there was an area, and again this is in the Old Testament, to take a person's life was lawful, it was scriptural in certain conditions. In Exodus 22 and verse 2 and 3 said, if a man is struck and killed while breaking in, there shall be no blood guiltiness on the man who struck him. That is, and we have that kind of principle in our law. Let's just say somebody kicks down your front door, he's got an axe in his hand, and I say, I'm going to kill everybody. You are within our current judicial system, you're within your rights to stop him by whatever means you have. If he is shot and killed on the spot, you have the right to protect your family under U.S. law. Now, if there's a guy out in the middle of the street, you know, and he's shaking a tire iron, and he's threatening you and all such as that, you can't put a weapon out the window and take his life because you're not in imminent danger. Now, Solomon said there's a time to kill and a time to heal. So there are some times where a person's life, certainly in the Old Testament, was justified. But think about this. There's areas not only of healing generally, but of Christians in particular. John prayed, the Apostle John prayed for this individual, and he said, I pray that you may be in good health and prosper in all things. God wants us to flourish. He wants us to prosper. And we want to be in good health. There's nobody that, oh man, I'd like to be in worse health. I'd like something else to go wrong. And so we try to take reasonably good care of ourselves and do positive things. And there's also the realm of healing spiritually. In Acts chapter 8 and verse 24, the Apostle John and Peter went to a central Palestine area, Samaria, where Philip the evangelist had been. And here was Simon the sorcerer, and he was upside down. And the apostle had to tell him, here's what's going to happen to you. And he said, pray for me that none of these things come upon me. We all cherish prayers. We have challenges. We want to do better. Well, think about this. We, as an application, and if you have a pet owner or an animal lover, when should a pet be euthanized? Well, there's a time for that. And when should it be healed? I really like dogs. I like animals in general, but I really like dogs. I like horses. But when they get to a spot, they're in too much pain. You're not blessing them by letting them continue in pain. Well, when should they be healed? Well, if you can do that financially and reasonably in recovery. And so you have those decisions to make. And Solomon said there's a time for each one of those. But when you have to put a pet you love down, and you put him down because you love him, man, that is so hard. When do you give a loved one life support? And when is it removed? Oh, man, that is, wow. And so, you have these living wills and things such as this. You can fill out the documentation now that tells your family what your choices are for you in end-of-life decisions before they get there and they have to make those decisions. Everybody can be different. My attitude is, if this old guy goes down, you say, well, let's put him on life support. If you want to, a day or two. But man, if I'm not popping back, forget it. Don't spend what few dollars left and give it all to the doctors and the hospitals. Because as a Christian, we know where our future is. I don't want to just be hooked up to machines and have something breathing for me and pumping my blood and all such as this. And so talk about that, because there are those end-of-life decisions. Now, how about this? When should a killer be executed? And when should he be forgiven? You go, oh, boy. And that has a whole emotional thing. What if that killer took the life of a member of your family? If you're a parent, took the life of one of your children. You say, well, when do you forgive them? Well, you never forgive them. Why? Well, I'd like you to think about this. Solomon said there's a time for every purpose under heaven. What you're looking at is a picture of a young man and an older woman who is not his biological mother. There was a teenager, and that's the man in the picture, now years later, Oshia Israel. He got into a fight and shot the 20-year-old Loramian bird to death at a party. The woman is the mother of the boy that was shot. And Oshia is now the grown man who, as a teenager, shot her son. 12 years later, Mary went to the prison to visit Oshia, the man who murdered her son. After serving 15 years, Oshia was released from prison. Mary had forgiven him, and after his release, they became close and remarkable friends. He became the son she lost. Mary told him, my natural son is no longer here, and I didn't see him graduate, and now you're going to college. She said to Oshea back then, I'll have the opportunity to see you graduate. I didn't see him get married, and hopefully one day I'll be able to experience that with you. Oshea said, just to hear you say those things and to be in my life in the manner in which you are is my motivation. You still believe in me, and the fact that you can do it despite how much pain I caused you is amazing. She overcame her heartbreak and her loss by forgiving. And he rewarded that by becoming the kind of man her son could have been. You go, wow. Wow. And so we think about these things. There's a time to kill. There's a time to heal. In Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 3, there's a time to tear down and a time to build up. If you were here back in, I got 2020, that's not right. That would have been 2 years ago. So a typo there, but it was demolished 21 years ago, the Kingdom, and you got to see it. They put all the charges, boom, 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 and the entire structure came down. And a $180 million Safeco field unit was built. Wow, it's beautiful. Way better than that. And so sometimes it is good to tear down things and build up other things. It happens with nations in Jeremiah 31:28. I've watched over them to pluck up and break down, to overthrow, destroy, and bring disaster. So I will watch over them to build and to plant, declares the Lord. Wow, that happened with Japan. It happened with World War II Germany. It happens in all kinds of life. Can we be happy with that? It happens in careers, in churches, cities, corporations. It happens in countries, families. It happens in finances. They just get crushed and they get rebuilt. And people can be torn down and built up again. Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have for you to prosper and not to harm you. Plans for you for a future and a hope. If our attitude is, man, this last thing was brutal, but we're moving on. We had gone through COVID like everybody else, and arson, and people moving off to all corners of the world. And yet, here saints say, we're here, and I am so glad that you are. There's a time to tear down and a time to build up. Just a couple more and we'll close. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 4 said, there's a time to weep and a time to laugh. You think about that. There is times where you say, Paul, aren't you laughing all the time? Oh no, we laugh a lot at our house. I think I mentioned last week, we tease a lot. Week before, I was doing something. I was in the hallway. I was going to go in the bedroom. I heard click. Oh, I'm going to lock the door. You know, it's not irritating. It wasn't. Nobody was mad at anybody. We're just teasing. I'm trying to go in. She locked it from the inside. So this week, guess what happened? Late one of the evenings, I zip up the stairs just before she gets to the door. Click. so she banging on the door. That's abomination and desolation. So you can have fun with these kind of things. You don't do something to make them irritated or hurt. You just, if it's funny, it's got to be funny for both people. But there are times where it's just something is a heartache. And there is a time to laugh. Ecclesiastes 7:14 says, in the day of prosperity be happy, in the day of adversity consider that God's made one as well as the other. In order to have a balanced, happy life, I realize you're going to have rain, but you also get sunshine. You get both of them in life. In Romans 12 and verse 15, he said, rejoice with those who rejoice. You know, sometimes people feel jealous. Oh, look what they got. I should have. No, put yourself in their place. Wow, I'm so happy for you. I'm so thankful that those good things came your way. And weep with those who weep. You say, well, how do you do that? You picture how it would be like if you were them. Not if you were you. Well, for me, I would brush that off. But if you were them, what they go through. You hear tragedies around the world, and rather just, that's them. Yeah, but if I was there, how big would that be for me? When Nikki Allison loses Richard, what would it be like to be them? We got a text from Risa Campbell, and Risa and Bart had been members here, and they're up in Alaska now. And Bart has continued in decline, and he had kidney failure and just multiple health problems when he was here, and has continued to decline. And he's in the hospital, and they're not expecting that he's going to recover. What's it like to be them? Put yourself in their place. And then it gives us a feeling of, how can I respond to others that are believers and friends and people going through difficult times? One of the illustrations that really stood out to me was the story of two inseparable friends who enlisted together, trained together, shipped out together, and fought in the trenches during World War I. During an attack, one of the duo was critically wounded in a field filled with fire, and it was suicidal to try to reach the barbed wire obstacles. And then, because of that, the one was unable to crawl back from his foxhole. So he's out there, he's wounded, fire is just racing back and forth, barbed wire obstacle, and so one of the two buddies is down. The entire area was under enemy fire. Nevertheless, undaunted, his friend decided to give it a go. Before he could get out of his own trench, his sergeant yanked him back and told him, "You are crazy. It's far too late. You can't do him any good. You'll only end up getting yourself killed." A few minutes later, the officer turned his back, and instantly his mate went after his friend. Shortly afterwards, he staggered back, mortally wounded, with his friend now dead in his arms. And the sergeant was both angry and deeply moved. He said, "What a waste." The man, mortally wounded, says, "No, sir, it was not a waste, because of what my friend said. He said, I knew you'd come." Oh, man. What he said, "I'll do anything for you." When we begin to think about one another that way, as what can I do for you? How can I help you? I'm willing to bless you. I'll do the very best I can. We give our lives for each other. That's some of the joys in serving Christ. And so, as we think about that, what about Matthew chapter 11 and down in verse 28? Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That's one of the joys of being in Christ. We're forgiven. We're brought together with one another. We're brought together with God. So what we need to do is believe, repent, confess, and be baptized. And we get that joy forever. And that having fulfilled the purpose of God in our own generation, we fall asleep and we get to be with him. If you'd like to respond in any way to the invitation, if you'd like prayers of the congregation, you want to be baptized, we've done some, I'll say, reconstructive remodeling for the baptistry. It'll just take us a half an hour to fill it up. We can baptize you right here, right now. You can, anything you need to do, we're willing to help you to do. Let's be standing and singing "Trust and Obey," number 714.